Right now, 91 wildfires are burning across the United States. The Dixie Fire in California has burned more than 240,000 acres and is only 24% contained. It's forced the evacuation of nearly 8,000 residents.
The nation's largest fire is still raging in southern Oregon. It's burnt over 400,000 acres of land and was reportedly 53% contained over the weekend. Combined, these two wildfires have scorched land almost the size of New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Here to discuss these disasters is Lily Jamali, co-host and correspondent for KQED's California Morning Report. Lily, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So pretty devastating wildfires. They're raging. What is the latest with this?
Yeah, we knew going into this fire season that it was going to be a really difficult one. And unfortunately, that exact scenario has come to pass. We are just in the beginning of August, and we're way ahead in terms of acres burned in California and in the West than we were at this point last year, which until that point was the worst fire season ever. And so, we're just kind of faced with a confluence of factors: record heat, record drought conditions. And so you have a lot of vegetation throughout this region that is just ready to ignite. The Tamarack fire started on federal land. I think a lot of people might be surprised to know that most of the forest land in California is actually under federal jurisdiction. And I think the point that Governor Gavin Newsom was trying to make by bringing that up, as collegially and, sort of conflict-free as he could, was that there are differing philosophies when it comes to fire suppression. When you look at federal policy versus the way CAL FIRE or local districts approach fire suppression, the state and these local jurisdictions generally try to get in there quickly and knock these fires down. And for a long time, the federal government has had a little bit of a different approach, which Newsom called the elephant in the room, a wait-and-see approach, which he's basically trying to say in the era of climate change just does not fly anymore.
What else does California and the West Coast generally need to be doing long-term to make itself less susceptible to fire season?
Well, in the immediate term, I think we were always going to have fires here. And I think the appeal that was being made by Governor Newsom and other governors to President Biden was they need more support. They need, for example, on the federal side of the equation, more aerial support, more firefighters. Retention of federal firefighters has long been an issue. They don't get paid a lot for the very difficult work that they do. And there was recently an increase in the minimum wage that is paid to federal firefighters who you might have heard of hotshots who often go into some of the most dangerous locations to knock these fires down. But longer term, I think there's a real recognition these last probably 3 to 4 years that the way that we build in California and other parts of the West may not be working very well. We have a lot of sprawl, a lot of building of new developments in what we call the wildland urban interface. And if we know that those parts of the state are fire prone and are continually going to be the locations where a lot of these fires spark, or at least where some of these fires eventually reach, I think there's a real conversation happening around whether that kind of development is smart. I'll give you one really quick example. In 2017, the Tubbs Fire burned through wine country in Sonoma County. And there's a development called Coffee Park that was really badly damaged. Most of the houses there were gone after that fire. I went and visited a little bit after. It was a year later, and most of those houses were either rebuilt or were on the way to being rebuilt. And so, even now, they've had to evacuate because of subsequent fires. So this is an ongoing issue, and I think, again, there is this discussion around how we build and how do we do it in a smart way.
Well, the Dixie Fire in California is also destroying the value of a trust fund set up to compensate past victims of wildfires started by Pacific Gas and Electric. According to Bloomberg, fire victims own nearly 25% of PG&E's stock, which has lost about 8% of its value since the utility giant said that it may have started the Dixie Fire.
The funds were set up for the victims of the Zog fire in 2020, which killed 4 people, including a young girl and her mother. Shasta County DA determined that PG&E Group was criminally liable for causing the deadly fire. How are Californians viewing PG&E lately?
I mean, not very well. I mean, we have a utility that causes fires basically every year, and these fires are often catastrophic in scale. I mentioned the fire that hit Paradise a couple of years ago. Just a couple of weeks after that, when PG&E went into bankruptcy, to deal with the mounting liabilities that they faced from these wildfires. And so there are 70,000 fire survivors who lost their homes and their businesses, and in some cases their loved ones, between 2015 and 2018 that were thrown into the bankruptcy process. The outcome of that was a settlement that was part cash, but also, and this is very unusual for bankruptcy, and also half PG&E stock, which today is trading at about $9 a share. So it's lost value since they funded it last year. And what this whole setup has really done is tether the fate and the compensation of these past fire survivors to how the company performs going forward. You mentioned the Zog fire. That's not covered under the bankruptcy. There were fires in 2019 and 2020, 2021. The Dixie Fire, which PG&E has said its equipment may have been involved in sparking. All of those are not covered by the bankruptcy. So now we're looking at new liabilities that this company is going to have to pay out eventually. And it is affecting the stock price. Again, future profitability affecting the fate of past fire survivors. It's created a really difficult regulatory situation. On the Zog fire, that's a fire that burned last year in Shasta County. It killed 4 people, including an 8-year-old girl. And most recently, we saw the Shasta County District Attorney there saying that PG&E will, in fact, face criminal charges. It's not exactly clear at this point what those charges will be, but she did say that she was expecting to announce them by September, which would be the 1-year anniversary of that very tragic fire.
It's unbelievable that they would tie the compensation to stock value of the company. So how does that even make sense? It's, here's a company that was mismanaged and ended up causing the damage and the death. And so we're going to give you some stock in that mismanaged company.
Yeah,
there's a lot of you're going to be compensated.
There are a lot of different parties that signed off on that deal, including Governor Gavin Newsom, including the California Public Utilities Commission, including Judge Dennis Montali in the bankruptcy court. There's a whole host of different actors that allowed that to happen. And there were a lot of fire survivors, I should note, who were very vocal about just how problematic they thought this would be way back in January and February of last year, months before a vote and months before this final bankruptcy settlement was approved. It's a good point. I mean, there's just not a lot of precedent for that. There are a couple of asbestos cases from a couple of decades ago where you had a similar setup. But the difference there is that the asbestos companies stopped selling asbestos. They stopped manufacturing the bad thing. And you have PG&E, which is sort of continuing business as usual. They are trying to, and regulators are tracking this very closely. They're trying to clean up their act and make their system safer, harden their grid as much as possible. But they're years and years behind in terms of doing that. And we just heard, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the CEO announced in a very hastily arranged press conference that they're going to be undergrounding, a fraction of their lines to try to make their system safer. The price tag on that was $15 to $30 billion. That's the price tag being floated right now. That's equivalent to all the long-term debt that PG&E currently holds. It's equivalent to half of the company's enterprise value. It's just really hard to see how that's going to play out financially for this company. And
Lily, real quickly, and because we've got to run, but does California agriculture get discussed much in this conversation, and the water intensive, say, almond farming that's going on in California and driving some of this?
Yeah, I mean, the water issue is a perennial subject of debate here in California. There's always a struggle among different parties about where the water should go. And of course, the farmers think that they should have access to it. then you have environmentalists who are often lobbying on behalf of salmon populations and other wildlife populations. But what we have seen so far is, there's projected record deaths of salmon populations. And so what we're looking at is really an entire remaking of the ecosystem. I think that debate is, again, like so many of these ongoing discussions here in California, is in for a major reset and a major rethinking about how do we allocate resources like that.
Sounds awful.
All right. Well, yeah.
Lily, thanks so much
thank
for
you so
joining us.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.